Haunted Laughter in the Woods, a scary camping story. Subscribe to Another World for great videos to relax, study, or just enjoy. It was a bright, sunny afternoon when they arrived at the campground near the Willamette River. The water flowed calmly, its surface shimmering under the late summer sun. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, casting long shadows across the clearing where 5 friends, Josh, Matt, Sarah, Chloe, and Eric, unloaded their gear. They had planned this camping trip for months, looking forward to the peace of the wilderness, the absence of cell service, and the chance to disconnect from their daily lives. Josh, the self-appointed leader of the group, insisted that they camp close to the river. "The sound of the water will help us sleep," he said, smiling as he pulled out his tent and began to set it up. Matt nodded in agreement, though Sarah shot a look at Chloe and Eric. "I don't know," she said hesitantly, glancing at the dense woods that seemed to stretch endlessly behind them. "This place feels off." Chloe rolled her eyes, tossing her backpack to the ground. "You're always paranoid, Sarah. It's just a camping trip, not a horror movie." Eric chuckled, though it was a nervous laugh. "Yeah, well, let's hope we don't end up as characters in one." His words hung in the air longer than intended, the breeze carrying them away towards the tree line. By dusk, they had a fire going. The crackling flames illuminated their faces as they roasted marshmallows and shared stories of past trips. The river's steady flow added a calming rhythm to the night, and the worries of city life seemed to melt away. The forest around them was alive with the sounds of chirping crickets and the occasional rustling of leaves, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. As the fire began to die down, Matt stretched his arms wide and yawned. "All right, I'm calling it a night. Early hike tomorrow, remember?" The others agreed, their laughter and chatter fading as they retreated to their tents. Sarah, however, was the last to crawl into her sleeping bag, her eyes lingering on the dark woods. Something about the way the trees swayed in the faint breeze unsettled her. She told herself it was nothing, just her overactive imagination. The silence of the forest pressed in around them as the night grew deeper, but around 2 in the morning, something changed. Sarah woke up first, her senses suddenly on high alert. At first, she thought it was just the wind howling through the trees, but no. There it was again, a low, guttural chuckle. It sounded distant, almost like someone or something was laughing just beyond the riverbank. Her heart began to race as she sat up, straining her ears to listen more carefully. The laugh came again, closer this time, a cruel and mocking sound that sent chills down her spine. She reached over and shook Chloe awake. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Chloe groggily opened her eyes, annoyed at being disturbed. "Hear what?" "Shh, listen." They sat in silence for a moment before the sound returned, this time louder, and unmistakably a laugh. But it wasn't the kind of laughter that belonged to a person having fun. It was sharp, hollow, and full of malice. Chloe's eyes widened. "What the hell is that?" Sarah shook her head, unable to answer. By now, the others were stirring. Eric poked his head out from his sleeping bag in the other tent, his face pale in the moonlight. "Did you guys hear that?" Matt, half asleep, groaned. "Probably some drunk campers down the river. Don't worry about it." But the laughter didn't stop. It grew louder, more menacing, yet still no footsteps, no sounds of movement in the underbrush, just that eerie laughter carried by the wind. Josh sat up, his brow furrowed. "Okay, that's not normal." "Should we check it out?" Eric asked, his voice shaking as he grabbed a flashlight. "Stay here," Josh said firmly. "I'll go look." "No way you're going alone," Matt said, standing up and grabbing his own flashlight. Together, the two of them unzipped the tent and stepped into the cool night air. The laughter seemed to come from all directions now, swirling around them like a nightmarish echo. They shined their flashlights toward the riverbank, but there was nothing. No movement, no figures lurking in the dark. Then, out of nowhere, the laughter stopped. The sudden silence was even worse than the sound. Josh swallowed hard, scanning the trees. "See? Nothing," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Probably just an echo off the water or something." They returned to their tents, though none of them could sleep. The oppressive stillness of the forest weighed on them, the absence of crickets and rustling leaves making every second feel like an eternity. Just as Sarah began to drift off, she heard it again, a rustling sound, this time much closer, as though something, or someone, was right outside the tent. Her breath caught in her throat. She felt a cold sweat break out across her forehead as she reached out to wake Chloe, but before she could, a shadow fell over the tent. And then she saw it. A hand, pale, thin, and human-like, pressed against the outside of the tent, its fingers long and bony, the nails jagged and dirty. It was motionless, as though whoever it belonged to was just standing there, waiting. Sarah screamed. The others bolted awake, their hearts pounding. "What? What happened?" Matt shouted, fumbling for his flashlight. "It's outside," Sarah cried, her voice shrill with terror. "There's someone outside the tent." Josh unzipped the flap and shined the light outside, but the hand was gone. The empty clearing stared back at them, silent and unmoving. "There's nothing there," Josh muttered, but his voice betrayed his fear. "No way," Sarah insisted, her whole body trembling. "It was right there. I saw it." Just as the words left her mouth, the laughter returned, louder than before, now impossibly close, as though it was coming from right behind them. But there were no footsteps, no sign of movement, just that cruel, mocking laugh that made their blood run cold. "We need to get out of here," Eric whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his own pounding heart. "Now." Without hesitation, they scrambled to gather their things, but before they could even finish, the tent's fabric rippled, as though something or someone was brushing against it from the outside. They froze. A loud thump echoed through the clearing, followed by a soft scraping sound, like nails dragging across the ground. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep guttural growl. "Run!" Josh shouted, his voice cracking with panic. They bolted out of the tent and into the woods, their flashlights bobbing wildly as they sprinted through the trees. The dense underbrush clawed at their legs, branches whipping across their faces as they ran. The sound of footsteps, heavy, uneven, echoed behind them, but when they glanced back, there was nothing there. The forest seemed endless, every tree blending into the next as they stumbled through the darkness, gasping for breath. Sarah tripped over a root and fell hard, her knee slamming into the ground. Chloe helped her up. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. The laughter returned, closer now, accompanied by the sound of something large crashing through the trees behind them. It was chasing them. They ran until their lungs burned, their legs screaming in protest. The river was somewhere to their left, but they had no sense of direction anymore, only the primal instinct to survive driving them forward. Suddenly, the ground beneath them sloped down, and they tumbled into a small ravine. The fall knocked the wind out of them, and for a brief moment, everything was still. No laughter, no footsteps, just the soft rustling of leaves and the distant gurgling of the river. "Is it gone?" Eric whispered, his voice hoarse and shaking. "I don't know," Josh replied, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. "I don't hear anything." For a long moment, they sat there in silence, listening. The forest seemed to have returned to normal. The night air was cool against their skin, and the distant sound of the river was almost soothing. But then, from somewhere far off, came a faint laugh. They didn't wait to hear more. Without a word, they climbed out of the ravine and began to run again, their bodies aching but their minds sharp with fear. They didn't stop until they reached the road, their flashlights flickering as they stumbled onto the asphalt. There, in the pale glow of the moon, they collapsed, panting and shaking. The laughter was gone, the forest behind them, silent once more. But the terror lingered, etched into their minds like a brand. The next morning, they made their way back to their cars in silence. None of them spoke of what they had heard or seen, but the unspoken truth hung heavy between them. Something had been watching them, something that didn't belong to this world. As they drove away from the campsite, Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror, her heart skipping a beat. For just a moment, she thought she saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching them leave. And then it was gone. They never went back.